Muslim integration is the hardest task British society has ever faced. Those words from the former chairman of the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission have reignited the debate about a deepening divide between the country's Muslim and non-Muslim populations.
The data collected shows a chasm opening between Muslims and non-Muslims, and the chasm isn't going to disappear anytime soon. What it reveals is the unacknowledged creation of a nation within the nation, with its own geography, its own values, and its own very separate future.
Well, those words come after a new opinion poll revealed the attitudes of Muslims differ from broader public opinion. The ICM poll suggests that more than half of UK Muslims believe that homosexuality should be outlawed. Roughly 1 in 3 thinks it's acceptable for a man to have more than one wife, something that's illegal in the UK. And 1 in 5 agrees that Sharia law should be introduced in certain areas of the country. Well, the country's Prime Minister, David Cameron's made repeated attempts to mend ties between Britain's Muslims and non-Muslims.
A very warm welcome to number 10 Downing Street. Assalamu alaikum. It's really great to have you here for this Eid al-Adha commemoration tonight. I want to say something about the enormous contribution that British Muslims make to our country.
Despite the Prime Minister's praise of UK Muslims, Islamophobia is on the rise in Britain. Hate crimes against Muslims in London alone have jumped considerably in the past 2 years.
Didn't even be in this country. You're lucky I don't work for immigration.
When's that? This morning?
And we gauged reaction on the issue from both sides of the debate.
Muslims are the most excluded and discriminated against class of population in the workplace. Now, if you exclude Muslims from the workplace, if you discriminate against them and you create a disenfranchised, marginalised community, Martin Luther King talked about in the 60s creating a black middle class which would help to address issues of civil rights and civil society disenfranchisement out in the US.
What you've just heard there is an endless soft left, liberal, self-serving litany of constant excuses. This reason, that reason. We have, what this survey shows, and what is really interesting, is I suspect Noah's only seen the same as I have. There will be much more of this comes out in the Wednesday night's programme. But what you see is that the community does not want to integrate.
Muslims are passionate, patriotic members of British society. We adopt British way of life. We have integrated pretty well, I would argue. And I think this opinion poll, which has been commissioned, is a red herring. His whole objective is about demonising Muslims. And this fits into the wider agenda of Islamophobia that exists within Europe.
Well, you have what I would describe as a sort of bottom-up apartheid, a self-imposed disintegration of society, where individual societies are living in separate, isolated communities within cities, within towns up and down the United Kingdom. I can't blame the Islamic community, or indeed any community which has disassociated itself from Britain in terms of British laws or British culture. You've got to blame the government that allowed it to happen.
The US intends to deliver more weapons to Syria's so-called moderate rebels should the current ceasefire fail. Among the potential arms recipients is the Free Syrian Army. That's an opposition force that's been praised by the West, but it turns out that its methods of recruiting fighters, well, they are far from moderate, as Maria Finoshina explains.
This man was a Syrian army conscript. To protect his identity, we'll call him Abdel. He says he had to flee his home in the predominantly anti-government Syrian north after his baby son was slaughtered.
The Free Syrian Army, when they learned that I served at the checkpoint of the state army, wanted me to join them. They kidnapped my little son, who was just 45 days old at the time, and told me that I had 72 hours to leave the military and become a Free Syrian Army soldier.
Abdel shows me the pictures kidnappers sent him in that time, of little Ibrahim, alive, a caricature with a beheaded doll that was supposed to increase the psychological pressure, and finally, of a half-naked baby boy and a sword next to him, ready to be used.
At midnight, they brought a black plastic bag to my porch. There was my son's body there. His head and arms were cut.
Abdel got a phone call the next day warning that his 2 other children would be next if he didn't join the Free Syrian Army. That morning, he moved his family to the refugee camp in Turkey and hasn't been back to Syria since.
They will kidnap your loved ones and blackmail you, and if you don't comply, they will kill your son, mother or sister.
That was 2012. Abdel assures me they were members of the FSA, the first organized armed opposition group in the Syrian conflict, which Western politicians lined up to describe as legitimate, supporting them financially and militarily.
We consider them the legitimate representative of the Syrian people.
The Syrian opposition, legitimate.
We are committed to do our part to support the moderate opposition.
It's so important that the United States and our allies and our partners provide the assistance that the opposition needs to strengthen itself.
Long before ISIL, Abdel insists the FSA used jihadist tactics to lure Assad army members. Defection's a vital psychological tool deployed at seemingly any cost. Defections from Assad's army got vast global media coverage, as you can see, which some suspect encouraged even more to desert. Outside Syria, those trying to topple Assad also understood this effect, such as these emails from Hillary Clinton, then running the State Department, which was plugging a tool to track Assad army defections.
Our logic behind this is that nobody is visually representing and mapping the defections, which we believe are important in encouraging more to defect and giving confidence to the opposition.
There is no suggestion that any of these people knew how some defections were being pursued. But Abdel's story indicates that not all desertions were made alone.